He was the soft-spoken voice behind some of the most beloved songs in America. Take Me Home, Country Roads, Annie's Song, Rocky Mountain High, music that painted him as the perfect symbol of peace, love, and nature. To millions, John Denver wasn't just a singer. He was a role model, a man whose smile and gentle voice seemed to reflect a pure and honest soul. But what fans didn't know was that behind the mountain charm and friendly image was a story far more complicated and far darker. His life was filled with messy divorces, explosive anger, dangerous addictions, and a final flight so reckless it stunned even the people closest to him. This is the untold story of John Denver, the hidden truth behind the golden boy of folk music, and the shocking downfall that no one saw coming. John Denver wasn't always John Denver. He was born Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. on the very last day of 1943 in Roswell, New Mexico. His father, a decorated Air Force pilot, was the kind of man celebrated in military circles, breaking speed records in bomber jets, and eventually landing a spot in the Air Force Hall of Fame. To outsiders, it looked like young Henry had the perfect role model. But inside the family, life was anything but stable. The military lifestyle meant constant moving. Arizona, Alabama, Texas. Just when Denver began to settle in, he was forced to leave again. He grew up feeling like he never truly belonged anywhere, carrying a loneliness that never left him. That changed when his grandmother placed a worn Gibson guitar in his hands. It was built in 1910, already more than 4 decades old by the time he got it. For Denver, it wasn't just an instrument. It was stability, something he could hold on to when everything else in life kept shifting. With that guitar, he discovered his true escape, music. By 11, he was already singing in the Tucson, Arizona Boys Chorus, learning harmonies and performing for crowds. By high school, he was performing folk songs in small shows, slowly realizing that music wasn't just a hobby, it was his lifeline. But music wasn't the only passion passed down from his father. Despite their often rocky relationship, the two shared one thrill that bonded them in ways words couldn't: flying. For his father, it was a career. For Denver, it was a freedom he'd chase his entire life, even when it would one day lead to his downfall. By the time he reached college, Denver thought he'd take a safe route, enrolling at Texas Tech to study architecture. But it didn't take long for him to realize that designing buildings wasn't his destiny. His heart was in songwriting, and chasing music meant walking away from the traditional life his father had wanted for him. So, he packed his bags and moved to Los Angeles. But not before making one crucial change. Henry John Deutschendorf was a mouthful, and definitely not the kind of name that would light up a marquee. Inspired by the mountains and rivers of Colorado, he reinvented himself as John Denver. It wasn't just a name change. It was a declaration. He was starting over. In the mid-1960s, opportunity finally knocked. Out of nearly 200 singers, Denver was chosen to join the Chad Mitchell Trio, a well-known folk group at the time. For 2 years, he toured the country, recorded 3 albums, and most importantly, he grew into the performer who could hold a crowd on his own. And then came the song that changed everything, Leaving on a Jet Plane. Denver wrote it, but it wasn't his voice that made it famous. When Peter, Paul, and Mary recorded it, the song exploded, climbing to #1 on the Billboard charts. Overnight, the world knew his words, even if they didn't yet know his name. But Denver wasn't about to stay in the background. When the trio dissolved, he went solo, determined to make his own mark. That chance came in 1971 with a song that almost failed before it ever succeeded. Take Me Home, Country Roads was plagued with early sound issues, and for a moment it looked like the track might never take off. But Denver's new manager refused to let it die. He pushed radio stations relentlessly until, slowly, the song caught fire. By August, it soared to #2 on the Billboard Hot 100, selling over 1 million copies. Denver wasn't just a songwriter anymore, he was a star. And yet, as bright as his rise was, no one knew that behind the success was a man carrying loneliness, unresolved battles with his father, and a love of risk that would haunt him for decades to come. The 1970s weren't just good to John Denver, they turned him into a household name. In just a few short years, he went from playing coffee houses to dominating the charts. His 1971 breakthrough, Poems, Prayers, and Promises, set the stage, but what followed was nothing short of a golden era. Rocky Mountain High hit in 1972, a soaring tribute to the wilderness he loved. Fans embraced it so deeply that Colorado eventually named it one of the state's official songs. By 1974, he was unstoppable. In just 18 months, 4 of his singles, Sunshine on My Shoulders, Annie's Song, Thank God I'm a Country Boy, and I'm Sorry, all hit #1. Each one revealed a different side of him: romantic, joyful, spiritual. At this point, Denver wasn't just a singer. He was everywhere. His greatest hits album became RCA Records' best-selling release ever, even surpassing Elvis Presley. His albums went multi-platinum. His songs filled radio waves, and his face appeared on magazine covers and TV specials across the globe. And then came Hollywood. In 1977, Denver starred alongside comedy legend George Burns in Oh God. Despite never acting before, his natural warmth translated on screen, making audiences believe he really could be chosen by heaven to spread a divine message. The film pulled in over $50 million and earned an Oscar nomination for its screenplay. Even across the Atlantic, he was unstoppable. British audiences who had once dismissed him fell in love through televised specials that showcased his music and charm. One of those specials even won him an Emmy. Suddenly, John Denver wasn't just America's folk hero, he was an international star. But with fame at its peak, cracks were beginning to show. Behind the soft voice and gentle image was a man battling a temper he couldn't control, addictions he couldn't admit, and a personal life ready to unravel in ways fans never imagined. Before we dive into the darker side of John Denver's life, don't forget to subscribe. That way, you'll always be the first to hear the shocking, hidden stories we uncover. At the height of his career, John Denver seemed untouchable. He wasn't just selling records, he was shaping culture. He testified before the U.S. Senate in the 1980s, defending free speech in music when many thought he'd side with censorship. He performed in the Soviet Union during the Cold War, bridging cultures when the world felt divided. He raised awareness for hunger, spoke for the environment, and poured his energy into charity. To millions, Denver wasn't just an entertainer, he was a hero. But while the world saw the smiling folk singer preaching peace, those closest to him knew a very different side. His marriage to Annie Martell, the woman who inspired Annie's Song, was falling apart. Fame had turned their dream into a nightmare. Annie described feeling invisible, overshadowed by the whirlwind of success. And when things crumbled, Denver's reaction shocked everyone. One infamous day in Aspen, after Annie cut down a few of his favorite oak trees, he snapped. Instead of arguing, he grabbed a chainsaw and sliced through their furniture, even sawing their bed in half. The story spread quickly. The gentle singer the world adored had a violent, unpredictable side. Court documents and whispers from friends painted an even darker picture. A man with a temper that terrified those around him. The divorce was messy, bitter, and left his clean image badly damaged. People who had once seen him as the embodiment of peace began to question who he really was. But the turbulence in his personal life didn't stop there. Denver wasn't done with love or with heartbreak, and his next relationship would unravel his private world even further. After his painful split from Annie, John Denver didn't give up on love. In the mid-1980s, while performing in Sydney, he met Australian singer and actress Cassandra Delaney. Their chemistry was instant. Within a few years, they were married in a picturesque mountain wedding that looked like something out of a fairy tale. But behind the smiles and glamour, cracks began to form almost immediately. Cassandra was much younger, and life with a global superstar came with pressure she hadn't expected. The adoration of fans never stopped, and neither did Denver's unpredictable moods. In public, he was the charming folk icon. In private, Cassandra later revealed, he could be angry, controlling, and impossible to please. For a brief moment, there was joy. Their daughter Jessie Bell was born in 1989, a miracle Denver thought would never happen after being told as a child he couldn't father children. But instead of bringing them closer, Jessie's arrival only exposed the fragility of their marriage. Denver grew jealous, distant, and increasingly difficult to live with. By the early 1990s, the marriage was falling apart. In an interview, Cassandra described a man very different from the gentle star his fans adored. She claimed staff feared him, assistants often cried and quit, and behind closed doors he drank heavily and lashed out in anger. Their divorce was brutal, with Denver suing Cassandra for millions and fighting a bitter custody battle over Jessie. And then, the final blow to his carefully built image came from Denver himself. In his 1994 autobiography, Take Me Home, he confessed to using cannabis, LSD, and even cocaine. He admitted to multiple affairs during both marriages and revealed stories of violent outbursts, including the infamous chainsaw incident. For fans who had idolized him as the wholesome country boy, it was devastating. The man who had written songs about peace and love now stood exposed, tangled in his own contradictions. But the damage didn't stop with his personal life. His career, once unstoppable, was about to take a hit that even John Denver couldn't sing his way out of. By the mid-1980s, the music world was changing. The folksy, acoustic sound that had once made John Denver a superstar was fading, replaced by synthesizers, drum machines, and pop anthems that defined a new generation. Denver, who had once outsold Elvis, suddenly found himself out of step with the industry he had dominated. He still believed he had more to give. In 1986, he finished recording what he thought would be his next big album, One World. He fully expected RCA, his label of nearly 2 decades, to renew his contract. After all, he had given them platinum records, global tours, and millions in revenue. But RCA had other plans. They were cutting costs, chasing younger acts, and Denver, despite all his success, was quietly shown the door. The rejection stunned him. After 25 albums with RCA, after building their best-selling greatest hits record in company history, Denver was discarded like yesterday's news. With no major label willing to take a chance on him, he was forced to release music under his own imprint, Windstar. For the first time, John Denver wasn't on top. He was struggling just to be heard. Concerts still drew loyal fans, but radio stations moved on, and record sales fell sharply. The man who had once been the golden boy of American folk was now a relic in the eyes of an industry obsessed with staying modern. And the rejection cut deeper than business. To Denver, it felt personal, a reminder that fame is fleeting, and no matter how high you climb, the world can move on without you. From the moment he first sat beside his father in a cockpit, John Denver was hooked on flying. For him, it wasn't just a hobby, it was freedom. When the spotlight dimmed and the music industry began leaving him behind, the skies became his refuge. Over the years, he logged more than 20,000 flight hours. He earned licenses for single-engine planes, multi-engine planes, gliders, and even hot air balloons. If it flew, Denver wanted to master it. Friends said his eyes lit up when he talked about aviation, as if music had only ever been his second love. But passion slowly turned into obsession. Denver wasn't content with casual flights. He pushed limits, sometimes performing glider stunts with the engine shut off, other times flying in conditions that more cautious pilots would avoid. And then came his personal struggles, alcohol, stress, and the weight of a crumbling image, all of which began to bleed into his flying life. In the 1990s, Denver was arrested twice for driving under the influence. The Federal Aviation Administration took notice. To hold a valid pilot's license, he needed a medical certificate proving he was fit to fly. After his second arrest, the FAA refused to renew it. Legally, this should have grounded him, but Denver found a loophole. Certified letters from the FAA demanding he return his license went unopened or were sent back. By avoiding those letters, the revocation process stalled. On paper, he still looked like a licensed pilot. In reality, he was flying without the medical clearance he needed. Friends worried. Some warned him that he was gambling with his life, but Denver ignored them. Flying was his escape, and nothing, not even the government, was going to take it away from him. But obsession can cloud judgment, and in October 1997, Denver's refusal to slow down would prove fatal. On October 12, 1997, John Denver climbed into the cockpit of a small, experimental aircraft he had only just purchased. It was a sleek 2-seater plane he had owned for less than 24 hours, and he'd barely spent half an hour training with an instructor. For most people, that would have been a red flag. For Denver, it was just another adventure. The plane itself was notoriously difficult to handle. Its fuel system had been modified in a way that baffled even experienced pilots. The selector valve, the switch that controlled which fuel tank powered the engine, was awkwardly placed behind the pilot's shoulder. To reach it, Denver would have to twist in his seat, stretch back, and even use pliers to turn it. The fuel gauges were also positioned behind him, forcing him to check them with a handheld mirror. It was an accident waiting to happen. That morning, Denver took off near Monterey, California, practicing landings and takeoffs. Witnesses recalled the sound of the engine sputtering before falling silent. The left fuel tank had run dry. Denver tried to switch over to the right tank, but the awkward valve placement made it nearly impossible to do quickly. In the struggle, he pressed down on the rudder pedal, sending the nose of the plane sharply downward. Seconds later, the aircraft plunged into the Pacific Ocean. Denver was killed instantly. The National Transportation Safety Board's investigation was damning. They found that he had started the flight with barely 9 gallons of fuel in total, dangerously low. They noted his unfamiliarity with the plane and its unsafe modifications. And they pointed out the obvious: this was an avoidable tragedy. With more fuel, more training, or a safer design, John Denver might have lived. Instead, the world lost a voice that had once defined an era. And while fans mourned, others quietly wondered, had his love for risk finally caught up with him? John Denver's death shocked the world. News outlets replayed his greatest hits, fans held vigils, and tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. To millions, he wasn't just a singer, he was the soundtrack of simpler times, a voice that carried warmth, peace, and a love for the natural world. Take Me Home, Country Roads, Annie's Song, Rocky Mountain High. These songs didn't just chart, they became woven into the fabric of American culture. But as the shock settled, so did the questions. Who was the real John Denver? Was he the gentle voice of love and unity? Or was he the man his ex-wives described? Controlling, volatile, consumed by demons he couldn't shake. The truth lies somewhere in between. He was a man who gave millions comfort through his music while privately battling flaws that contradicted his image. He was an activist, an environmentalist, and a humanitarian, but also a man whose addictions, anger, and risky choices hurt those closest to him. In the end, people chose the version they wanted to remember. Statues were built in his honor. His music still echoes at Red Rocks Amphitheater, and generations continue to discover his songs as if they were written yesterday. His troubled personal life may have shattered the myth of perfection, but it never erased the connection people felt to his voice. John Denver lived a life of contradictions, a man who sang of peace while waging private battles, a man who longed for freedom yet was trapped by fame, a man who reached the skies but ultimately fell to earth. And maybe that's why his story still resonates, because behind the legend was a human being, flawed, brilliant, reckless, and unforgettable.